Welcome to the Raising Values podcast, where the traditional family talks. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can support the Raising Values podcast through Patreon. Phil and Gillian are behind the mic, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Raising Values podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Gillian, of course. Good morning.
It's going to feel weird eventually to introduce ourselves every podcast.
Yeah, but hopefully we'll have a bunch of new listeners and, they're going to need to know who we are.
True. I mean, it's not like the little tag at the bottom of the screen wouldn't clue them in, but...
Oh, gosh. Okay.
This is called breaking the fourth wall. But anyway. So yes, we are Phil and Gillian +1 because we have a daughter. And I thought today would be a good chance to sit down and talk about raising children, which is I would personally say raising children is, for those who choose to take it on, it's probably one of the most rewarding experiences of being in a marriage, being in a relationship. It's
the scariest.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Part of anything. It's definitely scary. We were told when I was pregnant, we had just moved into this house and I was pregnant, and your boss at the time had said, you will worry like you've never worried before. And then I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but now I totally do.
Oh yeah. It's an incredibly intimidating prospect to know that you are solely responsible for the well-being and development of another human being. We've talked in the last episode about marriage, and my views on marriage are well known. I see it as an incredible responsibility. I see it as Gillian's happiness and her well-being and her care are ultimately my responsibility, but she's still a grown woman. She's able to take care of herself to a degree.
I would hope so.
Well, but compared to a child.
Oh, compared to a child, yes.
So the idea that we have this tiny little screaming human being in our hands who cannot take care of themselves, can't feed themselves, clean themselves, can't even communicate to tell us what they need. That was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It was what do I do with you to make you stop screaming and be happy?
Yeah, it was definitely the most frightening time of my life. And we've gone into this on past episodes, even here on Raising Values, but on Matter of Facts. But having the postpartum that I did and not having that whole, I always call it that Mother Earth kind of connection with your child and all that stuff. It made it more difficult for me to connect with her. And then you add the crying and the screaming and the total lost. I was just lost. I didn't know what to do. Do I feed her now? Do I change her now? Does she need to be? And it was so overwhelming for me. And it wasn't until she was probably about 3 or 4 years old, probably 4, where I started to calm down a little bit. I'm okay, I can do this. That sounds really awful though, being a mother of 4 years and it taking that long to finally get into a groove. But I can't imagine that I'm the only one that it took so long to come into motherhood the way that I did. My pregnancy was rough. I don't know if we've gone into how rough my pregnancy was. I know we did on that one episode of Matter of Facts, but my pregnancy was rough. We had already lost a child. And so, gosh, just saying that, every time I say that,
a twinge.
I get this pit in my stomach and I start to get tears in my eyes. So we had already gone through that, and during my pregnancy, I was sick, and the last trimester of my pregnancy, I was very sick. I wasn't bedridden, but I had gestational diabetes, and I had I was just in pain. It was not a fun pregnancy at all. And I know there are women who have great pregnancies and everything is fine, but mine was not. And I never felt that connection. Like I was like, oh yeah, I'm pregnant. This is so sweet. And I would rub my belly and things like that. And I did love feeling her move and kick and everything else. But that connection I felt like wasn't there. And so I felt like I was kind of, I was jilted. Is that the right word I'm thinking of? I felt like I didn't get that whole Mother Earth experience. Like I didn't get that whole connection that a lot of mothers feel. But having talked to many more women,
less uncommon than
it's really not.
usually.
Yeah, it's not as uncommon as I believed, and I wasn't the only one who was dealing with that.
I would draw the comparison between like our discussions about marriage and about how like so many of the things we encountered in marriage nobody had really warned us about, and a lot of it some of it I feel like is because like a lot of people close to us hadn't experienced it themselves, and a lot of people just don't like talking about the negatives.
Oh gosh, no.
So I feel like that may have been like whenever you hear about a woman bringing a child in the world, most of what you hear is that Mother Earth, I felt so in love with my child. You hear all that. You don't hear the other side of that equation and the pitfalls that could be there.
Yeah.
Certainly, I mean, you might hear it from close family friends, but you're certainly not going to hear it from just,
I didn't even hear it from close family friends or family. And I had reached out to cousins, and I really reached out to every woman that I could. And that is where I felt most alone, because most of the women in my family and most of my friends had not gone through the experiences that I had. And so that's when I started to branch out into social media groups and things like that to find other women that were going through those same things or had gone through them. I know that, I want to say, and this is probably not the right statistic, but I believe that 1 in 4 women will lose their first pregnancy. I want to say that that's the statistic, but at that, trust me, I could be totally off there. So, and as horrible as this sounds, it did make me feel a little bit better knowing that when we first conceived our first child, that I wasn't in this lone group by myself that had lost their first pregnancy, which made it very scary for the second one, because we did everything we could. We were eating right. Phil had stopped smoking. I was making sure I wasn't ingesting anything that could potentially harm me and potentially harm the baby and all that stuff.
And from the earliest moments, you had an inkling that you probably were pregnant. I mean, you were very, very intentional about following with your OB, and like we took this pregnancy so seriously because we really wanted it to come to term. We desperately wanted to be parents.
Yeah.
And I think that may be what's like part of this conversation is like some people, I don't like to use the word they whoops into being parents because that makes it seem like the
baby is the consequence.
Well, either that or like it diminishes the parent's connection to the child, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But like we intentionally wanted to be parents.
Yes.
There was no accident involved here. This was like we planned this. We did everything humanly possible to make sure this worked out the way it was supposed to.
There were days where I would call Phil and I was like,
you better be ready.
Be ready. The clock is saying now, and today is the day. So, I mean, that's how intentional we were with having Piper.
Thank God I don't have performance anxiety. Because there's something that goes on in a man's mind when a woman says, "Today is the day. You had better show up ready for war."
But we're not the only parents who did that. And thank God, like no pressure. Think about it now. But
now she thinks about how I was put on the spot.
Well, I wanted a baby and you wanted a baby. And so yes, I remember calling you on the way home from work one day and I was like, today's the day, like we have to do this and everything is like lining up and it's right. And I was tracking, I kept a notebook, I was taking my temperature, everything. I was doing all the things that I was told to do to ensure that I was ready to conceive. And I just needed you to show up and play along. Come on. It sounds so crazy. But I know that we're not the only ones that do that, especially couples that have a much harder time conceiving. But yes, hydrate.
And change your
Thank you,
socks.
Kyle. There were all sorts of superstitions, like turn around 3 times on the balcony and then come in. No, we didn't do crazy things like that, but we were taking care of ourselves a lot better after we lost our first one. And then Piper stuck, and we were so thankful and grateful for that. And I think that story has to be told before we can get into the whole parenting episode, because it built a foundation for where we went after that. And then once Piper was born, and then of course, just like every couple and every family, snags and what did I say in the last episode? Potholes,
speed bumps,
everything showed up, and we had to learn how to fight through those things. My favorite quote, or it wasn't a quote, but whatever, it was the saying was, when a child is born, so is the parent. And I kept having to remind myself that I'm a mom now. The minute that Piper was born, I was born as well. Phil was born as well. I was born as a mother, and Phil was born as a father. And I was now in this different role of my life that I knew I had no education on, except for what I saw in the women in my life that were mothers. I didn't go to any professional development to learn how to do this better. There was no training involved. There was no book. And I wasn't prepared for what came, but I think we did pretty good.
Nope.
Now, and of course, we've only been parents for 10 years. So almost 11. She'll be 11 in May. And I can say that we have shown up and 100% gotten through everything that has been thrown our way so far. So obviously not experts in parenting, but I do feel like we've gone through some pretty
we've gone through
crazy things.
I will compare parenting like this. Parenting is like showing up for the first day of your new job when you lied on your resume and have no idea what you're doing.
Totally lied.
And your boss's only communication skill is screaming louder until you figure out what they want.
Yes.
That is
perfect.
That is a perfect analogy, isn't it?
She was the boss. She still is.
Yes.
No, she's not the boss, but
no, but like that's like raising children in a nutshell. But I mean, as complicated as I think it can be, from like before we get into like some of these smaller to these more specific topics, but like philosophically, I've always viewed parenting as a couple of base principles. Like, first of all, I truly believe this, as silly and as hippy dippy as it sounds, I truly believe that if you enter into raising children on a solid foundation of a solid relationship with the child's mother or father, from the other perspective, I feel like that makes things work out a lot better. I think that if you just genuinely love the child, that tends to solve 90% of problems, or 90% of things. Because like, if you genuinely love that child, you will naturally gravitate towards doing whatever you believe is best for that child. You'll want to meet their needs. You'll want them to be happy. You'll want them to feel protected and loved and all those things. Like, so like, I really, to me, it's like, yeah, there's lots of little rabbit holes to stick your head into when it comes to parenting, lots of different techniques and lots of different little problems to overcome. But I think that genuinely, like, if the parents are committed to each other, and if they both love the child dearly, things work their way out.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
I mean, it sounds like really simple, but like, I believe that.
I do believe that a child's parents have to have a strong relationship to raise children.
And let me just say that, like, I don't say that, hey, this is a slight towards the two of us or towards anybody else, but like, I firmly believe that having a child does test a relationship, and not by any action of the child, but it's the stress, it's the upheaval, it's the change in schedules, it's the new impetus upon finances, time, attention, sleep, everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like any other massive world-ending change you have in a relationship. It's going to include stress. There's no way around that. So I
Yeah.
always say that if you're going to enter into having a child, the first thing you have to do is make sure that that relationship is tightly knit together as possible, so that your what you have to do to prepare for having a child is you have to make sure that when stress is encountered in that relationship, your default emotion is cling to each other,
Yeah.
not fight against each other. If you're still at the stage of your relationship where every time there's stress, you two go to blows, like hopefully not physically, but you fight against each other every time there's stress. If that's the stage of your relationship you're at, you don't need to have children right now. You need to back up a couple of steps, turn this into this, where every time Gillian and I get stressed out, I want nothing in the world more than to just like crawl into her lap, stick my head into her neck, and like little baby, just curl up and have her comfort me, because that is my comfort. That's what makes me unwind. And I feel like if you're not at that stage of your relationship yet where you seek comfort in other people, in your parents, in your friends, and drink and whatever else, you're not at the point of a relationship you need to have kids. You're just not.
Yeah. I agree. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive into our subtopics so that we're not an hour and a half into this episode.
Oh, we never do that.
Yeah.
All right. So I know that this is one, like, and a lot of this from our personal experience, but this is something I feel like probably every couple struggles with.
So our last episode was on marriage and relationships, and we talked about having different I'm not going to say this right, but we had different
Viewpoints.
different things that stumbled relationships.
Oh.
I don't remember what I'm trying to say, but I think yes, balancing discipline and nurturing definitely can be for a couple and as a family that's starting out as one of those stumbling areas, because I can remember when we were talking about getting pregnant and starting this family and everything else. Phil had just come home from Iraq. He was still very much Army in the head.
Very rigid, very
rigid. And I remember having conversations with him saying, yes, I want to have kids. And yes, I want to have kids with you. But it can't be boot camp. I don't want our children to, and notice I said children because I wanted 4 children. And
I wanted 2.
Phil wanted 2 children. And God gave us one amazing child.
Who has personality of 4.
Well, that makes her sound like she's got some mental issues, and she doesn't.
No, not 4 personalities. She's just 4 kids worth crammed into one.
So I told him I don't want this to be a boot camp. I don't want, there has to be some regimen and some, what's the word?
Structure.
Yes, structure. I'm sorry, guys. I'm really struggling with my words this morning.
It's Sunday morning. We're not even finished with our first cup of coffee.
Yeah. So I don't even remember how you responded to that. I think it was just kind of like, really? Like, why would I do that? And it turns out 10 years later, so we have a lot of these conversations with Piper, very open conversations with her, because we understand that she's an adult and we are trying to raise
She's not an adult.
I mean, we understand that she's a child, not an adult, and we are raising an adult. But some of these conversations, she's just mentally mature enough to have. And so we asked her a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even sooner than that, what is one thing that you really, really like about growing up in this household with me and Phil as your mom and dad? And one of the first things she said was the structure. She loves the structure. She knows exactly where to meet me and Phil. She knows exactly what is expected of her. She knows what she should and shouldn't do. She knows what's going to get her in trouble. She also found out the other day that she knows when Mama knows when she's lying.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that shocked her, because she lied to you about something, and I was watching her face.
She told me a bit of a white lie.
And there was a little twinge in her little face somewhere. And I was like, you're lying. And she looked at me like, how did you know? I caught her in a lie, but she doesn't lie to us.
No,
She doesn't lie.
hardly ever.
I think it was because she didn't want to go brush her teeth. And she said that she had brushed her teeth or some hygiene. She had done some hygiene. Anyway, so we have these conversations with her. And maybe it's not fair of us to do that. Maybe it's not fair of us to gauge how we're being a parent to her. But I think
I disagree.
well, that's what I'm getting at is I think it's okay to. You called her the boss. She's the boss, and we turned in false resumes to her, and totally lied on our resumes as parents. But I think it's okay to go to the boss sometimes and say, how are we performing? Can you give me a performance eval real quick and just, what's working for you and what's not working for you? And I think it's okay to do that on a age appropriate level. I think it has to be age appropriate, especially for your child.
Well, and I think what's important to separate out is like, you have to like my whole viewpoint on being a husband is like my responsibility is to make sure that your needs are taken care of. Those needs are physical, emotional, relationship, all sorts of things. That's my job as your husband. Well, my job as a father is to make sure her needs are taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So when she tells me I like the structure, that's telling me that need for structure, for discipline, for surety of what is expected of her, that need is being met.
Yeah.
Now, if she had said, I don't like brushing my teeth, that's not a need. That's an emotion. Like you have to kind of separate out from what you're getting, what part of this is relating to his or her needs being met, and what part of it is I don't like my bedtime or I don't like my brush my teeth.
Yeah, that's very much well, get over yourself. You have to go do that. And there is no, this is it. Like you have to do this or there will be consequences. And that brings us back to discipline and nurturing and how to be an open. That's right, Jim. That's I know I have, and I feel like you have. That's been in the back of my mind ever since she was a baby. And I kept having to remind myself, I'm new to being a mother. I'm not an expert at being a mother.
It's our first try at this, and even if you have multiple children, every child is different. So it's always your first time parenting that child.
Yeah. So the discipline for Piper has never been, I wouldn't say, well, I can tell you this, Phil did not turn it into a boot camp in this house. He definitely did not. And as gruff as he looks and, the beard and the past in the army and everything else like that, he is such a big cuddle bear nurturer. Piper is such a daddy's girl. And we tell her that now a lot. And you know what? And I know she's listening in her bedroom. She's up in her loft listening to us. It used to bother me. That because for the first,
you carried her for 9 months, and then for the rest of her life, she
I tried so hard. I gave everything, and she comes out and she looks like you, and she only wants you.
I still contend she has my eyes, and she looks like you.
Yes. Well, that's what everybody says.
Everybody says that except you. You're the only one that says, "Oh, she looks just like her dad."
Well,
like, no,
I know. I look at her and I'm like, that is Phil. And
she got my eyes, my eyelashes, my eyebrows. She got about this much of me. Everything else.
It was funny because your dad, when we were still in the hospital, his dad came in and he goes, "Well, she got your mouth," and I didn't know. I didn't know if that meant like the shape of my mouth or if your dad was saying she's screaming and hollering and so she's got your mouth. But
no, I know that's from here down, all the way down to her toes, she looks like you.
Anyway, so balancing discipline and nurturing.
Yes.
Piper has never been beat. She's never been. She's been spanked. We knew going into it, because I think that's important. Is you have to discuss these hard topics with your partner before the kid comes, and you have to understand where each other stands in discipline and nurturing. And hopefully, of course, you're going to nurture your child, but the discipline is just as important as the nurturing, because a child they have to understand that there are consequences for their actions. And for a while, when Piper was little, I wanted nothing but nurturing. Like, don't be mean to her, don't be harsh to her.
And I
We don't need to
refused.
discipline.
I shut that down very
Well, it's not
quickly.
that we didn't need to discipline, but I just had this very, I guess, guilt, if that's really the emotion that I was feeling
Yeah,
of disciplining her.
because of
And
the
then
disconnect you
he's
had from her
yeah, I
from when she
think
was
from the
really little.
disconnect of when she was little, not connecting this mother nature thing. And Phil made this really good point of, but we're not raising a child, we are raising an adult. And I had to keep saying that, like, she's going to be an adult one day. And one day she's going to be, she's going to work, she's going to be an employee of somebody, and she's going to be a mother one day, and she's going to be this, and she's going to be that. And so it was easier for me then. It's still hard sometimes for me to watch Phil discipline her, or to watch or to listen to myself discipline her. And disciplining for Piper, we've gotten off very, very easy. The mom look or the dad look sometimes is all it takes, is a discipline, and she gets back in line where she's supposed to. I think I can count on one hand where Piper was spanked. And by spanked, it wasn't like a full on beating. We didn't
Nope.
hold her arm and beat her. She got a pop on her leg or a pop on her hand and understood, oh, like redirected that whole brain and the thing that she was doing back to, now let's talk about this. Like, I need you to focus and listen and do what I'm asking you to do. One of the hardest things to discipline, I feel like, for her was when I call your name, you answer. And because there were times where we would play outside and she would listen, like she was playing, she wasn't really paying attention. I'd call her name and she wouldn't answer. And I knew she heard me. And so there were times where the discipline had to take over for things like that. Because what if you were running out in the road, Piper, or what if you were going to stick your hand on the stove and it was hot? Like, you have to listen to me. And so she's a kid, there's just so many things that we had to discipline for.
Yeah.
But the nurturing came after the discipline, and the nurturing came in between the two. So I think she's nurtured.
Well, a couple of things is that, like, first and foremost, I tried my best to make it a habit after she was disciplined to always end with a hug. Like when, and even beyond even the very, it wasn't a common experience for her to get spanked. It didn't happen often. It didn't need to.
No.
And once she had reached a certain age level, we got away from spanking, started sending her to the corner, because, like, I understood intrinsically that putting a child in the corner, you're taking away fun, you're taking away parents' attention, you're taking things away from them that they want. And that is a natural way to instill consequences for poor behavior. Is if you do things I don't like, then things get taken away from you, which, I don't know. Some parents get this in their head that, like, that's being ugly or mean to the kid. And my point that I made to Gillian, in tandem with the whole we're raising an adult, I understand she's a child, but we're raising an adult, is from now until 17 and 9/10 of age, I'm in charge of her consequences. You're in charge of her consequences. She does something wrong, we dole out the punishment we see fit. But there will come a point in her life we don't get to choose the consequences anymore.
Yeah.
That world does.
Yeah.
Her boss will. Her teachers will. Her anybody she's in a relationship will. Friendship, all the way up to marriage. The world will choose her consequences, and the world doesn't care about her the way you and I do.
Right.
So I've always stood by very firmly by this idea that right now, any consequence I hand out to my daughter pales in comparison to what that world is going to give to her. So my goal is to make sure that on the day those consequences apply, she understands how to survive in that world, because dad's not here to protect her anymore. Dad's not here
to give her a hug after.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is also the reason why every time she'd come out of the corner, every time discipline had to take place, it was always to hug, to talk to in a calming voice, to reassure, I'm not angry at you. And I've told her that many times. I'm like, Piper, I am not mad at you. This is not dad's angry, so dad punished me. This is, I punished you because your behavior was A, unacceptable, B, every behavior I'm trying to train out of her at this point is a behavior that I know will hurt her later in life. And it's none of these none of this is, I want you to stop doing this because it annoys me. It is, if it annoys me, it's going to annoy everybody else. It's going to annoy your teachers. It's going to annoy your principal. It's going to annoy your potential friends at school. Like, these behaviors have to stop because they make it more difficult for you to exist in that world out there. And that's always my perspective.
And you said something about being angry and, telling her that you weren't angry. That was, it was probably not one of the hardest things I had to learn as a parent, was to not discipline out of anger.
Never
But
discipline out of anger.
I can't say that I wasn't angry at some of the things that she did, but I had to learn how to calm myself down first and then discipline, because it wasn't, we just couldn't discipline out of anger. And I'm going to throw some people on the spot, but I know that there were times when I was a child that I was disciplined out of anger, and my sisters were disciplined out of anger. And the lesson learned was not what was intended by us.
It was, don't piss off mom and dad.
The lesson learned was, don't piss off mom and dad,
And conversely, I can remember a few times, not often, but a few times when I was young, where I would get sent to my room specifically to give my parents a chance to come back before they had to come deal with me. Because it was the same thing. It was like, I cannot instill this, like, instilling discipline is a teaching moment. You're a teacher. Can you teach a child when you're angry?
No.
Okay. So you cannot administer discipline in a proper manner when you are angry. You have to be calm and controlled, and you have to marshal yourself first. So, like, for parents out there that are struggling because their kid has done something so incredibly, out of their head that you just don't know how to react, send them to the room for 5 minutes and then process before you go talk to them.
And that can be part of their discipline, is you need to go to your room for 5 minutes. But of course, sending Piper to her room wasn't ever a discipline for her, because it was like, oh yes, I'm in my nest now. And it was more the corner that she needed.
But the corner worked, because the corner took all the things from her she wanted to do, which was the whole point. Yeah. But that I feel like is like the conversation between discipline and nurture. Because if you discipline without the nurture, then the child never. Then I feel like, children, they need to be nurtured. They need to feel loved. They need to feel protected. They need to feel safe. Like, those are all emotional needs that you have to fulfill as a parent. Otherwise, you're going to have a very horribly adjusted child. And at the same time, if you nurture them without discipline, they grow up not knowing how the world works. Because all the world is consequences for decisions you make.
Good or bad.
Yeah. So, like, to me, and these both relate to the ultimate function of a parent. The ultimate function of a parent, your ultimate job is, you're their first and last teacher. Mm-hmm. You're teaching them what it means to be in a stable household. You're teaching them what it means to feel protected and safe, and be in an environment where they feel comfortable, because they're protected and safe, to process and unpack very complicated emotions that they don't know how to deal with, because it's the first time they've ever felt them.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're teaching them that delaying immediate gratification, that controlling their emotions, controlling their behavior. Mm-hmm. You're teaching them how to interface with other people so that you can cooperate with them and get what you need from them. Like, that's your job. That is what discipline and nurture is. It is two arms of the same job of, you have to teach this child, because they came into this world with a little bitty tiny smooth brain,
no noodles,
not knowing anything except, I scream until I am happy.
Yes.
And you have to take them from that to this, like, to semi
I wouldn't use me as a
semi well-adjusted, semi-functional adults. Like, it's
except before a coffee.
Oh no. Well, she's not a coffee hound, and I'm hoping she doesn't get into that habit. But yeah, before I've had my coffee, I'm basically a toddler again.
I'm glad he admits it.
Angry and
it's being recorded. All right.
But you know that about me. Look, a toddler, you stick a bottle in her mouth and they're happy. Just hand me this and I'm happy. I mean, it's simple.
What's our next topic? Ooh, boundaries.
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 And I have 2 modes for this one.
Go for it.
First one is boundaries for the child.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is boundaries for the parent.
Okay.
Because I feel like boundaries for the child should be pretty well understood. Like there's certain things you are going to declare out of bounds for the child because it's bad for them, it's whatever. But I feel like where a lot of parents really, 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 really screw up, and I feel like you had trouble with this at first,
Okay. Tell me.
is they don't install boundaries for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like they get it in their head that my job is to just give endlessly to this child of myself. But you said before, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
And I know that there were times you eventually kind of got it and started hearing what I was saying. But there were times where I was telling you, I'm like, you have got to take time to yourself. You have got to tell her no sometimes. And like there were times, and there was a period of our marriage where she was going to you exclusively for some things because I had already
she knew.
Well, but I had already told her no because I'm like I'm doing dishes. I'm not gonna stop doing dishes to play with you. This is important. This has to get done. Or I'm folding laundry and you want me to play right now. You can wait 5 minutes. I was trying to install boundaries for her to understand that there are times when you do not get to monopolize dad's attention because yes, I love you more than life itself, but I also love your mother and I also have responsibilities here at the house I'm trying to take care of. So you cannot, all of life cannot be play, and mom and I cannot be your sole source of entertainment. Like you have to learn to be bored sometimes, as cynical as that sounds. But the same thing I say like in restaurants where you see the kid that they can't get off of an iPad for 5 minutes for a family meal.
That's the parent.
Yeah, it is the parent. But my point is, I've said on several occasions, I'm like, that child was never taught how to just be bored. Like sometimes you have to sit and be bored, and you have to just sit there and, quite frankly, sit down, shut up, and just chill out. It's going to be the way it is. It's like you can't, and that comes with the whole discipline and nurture thing. I have to teach that child how to sit and be bored. If they're going to make it through the DMV at any point in their lives, they're going to have to sit and be bored. But if we don't,
that true.
But if you don't teach them that, then they go through life with this unrealistic expectation of I demand to be entertained and I get entertained, and they never learn how not to be that way.
Yeah, and you see all the, well, at least I've seen the memes, or I've seen the things on social media that says, your child, you have to let your child be bored. And my gosh, how many times has Piper been bored? There was something the other day. She wanted to go out and she wanted to go do something. I was like, no, this is a day of rest. Like, we are resting. I am not getting out of my pajamas. You're going to have to just figure out something to do. And that doesn't mean we're going to sit here and do crafts all day, or we're going to play games all day. We're going to everybody's going to do what they need to do. And
to unplug.
Everybody needed to just unplug that day.
Yeah.
And she just had to be bored, but she figured it out. She figured out what to do, and she did her own thing. And it wasn't that we weren't together. We were all together as a family in the house and mostly in the same room the whole day. It's just that each other needed to find their own way to unplug and not have someone else relying on them for entertainment.
And not have someone else dictate their priorities for that moment.
Yeah. I still struggle with pouring from an empty cup with her. With you, I struggle with. You
struggle more with her than with me.
Well, yeah, I do struggle more with her.
18 years, you've gotten very good at telling me no.
Well, almost 11 years, I've gotten better at telling her no. But I will say that the guilt still settles inside my stomach when I have to tell her no. And maybe that'll get better as time goes on. I don't know. I think it's probably just me. I think
you're a people pleaser.
I am a people pleaser. I always have been. I was the person in our family growing up that, made sure everybody was happy after a fight, or, I tried to make sure, there's a name for that type of person. But I unfortunately let that come into my parenting And as a mother, I wanted her to be happy. I didn't want my baby to be sad. I didn't want her to be upset. And, after she was disciplined, I didn't want her to feel bad. But some of those emotions have to happen for our kids. And it's it's just part of growing up. They have to be able to feel those things, to know what they are, then to know how to overcome those emotions. And that was one thing that I struggled with as an adult, because I was never there wasn't that I wasn't allowed to feel those emotions. I wasn't taught how to manage those emotions. And unfortunately, that has bled over into being a mother and into being a wife. And those are a lot of struggles that as an adult, I have had to teach myself. And then with the help of my husband, and even with the help of my in-laws and my sisters who also dealt with those issues, we've all kind of come together and figured out, okay, this is what works best for me. And this is what that emotion truly is. It was, my brain thought it was something else. And this is how I have to overcome it. Even if that means for some emotions, a wall has to be built, or removal of someone that you love dearly from your life because they are toxic and they exhibit those tendencies to bring out those emotions that, while I just said that those emotions need to be felt, they don't need to be felt all day every day. So building that wall and removing toxic people from your life that constantly make those emotions present is not a bad thing. And so I think the one emotion I deal with the most is guilt. And
in this context, like, one way of removing those toxic people from your life is not allowing your child to become toxic.
right.
Because, like, there's not a nice way to say this, so I guess I won't. But, like, I'm kind of notorious for telling people, like, I refuse to raise an a-hole.
Yeah.
And my child is a wonderfully well-behaved, beautiful, intelligent young woman. Like, I try not to embarrass her about it, but, like, she's watching her growing up has been heartwarming for me, because she's growing up into, like, the best of both of us, with very few of either what I perceive to be our weaknesses or downfalls. She's an incredible child. That being said, I look
We're
at
not biased or anything.
I'm allowed to be biased. She's my daughter, but she's an awesome kid.
She is an awesome kid.
But, like, I look around at other people's kids and I see this rainbow of horrible behavior. I see attention-seeking behavior. I see destructive behavior. I see just kids that are little a-holes. They were never taught how to behave properly. They were never taught how to behave in a way that doesn't aggravate the hell out of every adult within 50 miles of them. They were never taught anything to make them a productive human being at some point in the future. And I've had people that have at times been critical of, like, my parenting style. They believe it's too harsh. They believe it's too rigid. They believe there's too much emphasis on discipline or rules. And the thing I've always responded to all those people with is, I'm like, I refuse to raise a little a-hole. I refuse. Like, my child can do anything she wants with her life. She could go on to be the first woman president. She could be an astronaut. She could, I think lately her whole thing is she wants to run, like, a corgi rescue, like a little nonprofit to rescue stray dogs. I don't care what she does with her life. She will make me proud no matter what, because we have raised her to be able to perform anything she wants to do in her life. And I think the important part of installing boundaries around this child, even between you and the child sometimes, is, again, you're trying to take this unformed lump of clay and you're trying to push them into a mold. You're trying to teach this child, you cannot demand my attention all the time, because one day it's not going to be mom's attention she wants. It's going to be potentially a boyfriend, a fiance, a spouse. It's going to be friends. It's going to be someone else. Yeah. And if you don't teach her she can't demand someone else's attention 100% of the time, I mean, think about how far our relationship as boyfriend-girlfriend would have progressed if there were not times you had to accept the fact that I cannot have 100% of my boyfriend's attention. He has a job. He's in college. He has all these other things going on. Sometimes I have to share him with the rest of the world.
I didn't like it.
And she probably won't either. And most teen to 20-something-year-old women don't like that. But if we don't teach that to her now, and
Yeah.
she's 10, by the time she's 20, she's going to drive some poor guy crazy.
Well, that might happen anyway.
I mean,
she does have my genes.
She's definitely going to confuse the hell out of him.
Yes, we do tell her that.
Oh, I tell her that on a fairly frequent basis, actually. I'm like, you are going to make some poor boy so confused one day. Like, she's half my genetics, and I don't understand her sometimes.
Well, that's because she's
the other half
of
is
me.
This one.
And I still confuse you.
So
I love how you put the banner of guarding our children from malicious influence up
right
after we talk about her having half of my genetics.
No, now some of this conversation, I think you and I are going to speak in kind of like, I don't want to say coded language, but like, I'm sure that just in case there are families that happen to be listening, I don't want us to use like really ugly language.
Okay.
So that might sound odd coming from me.
I don't. I guess I'll go with the flow and see what you're talking about.
Okay, so what I'm thinking is like guarding our children from malicious influence. This can come from a variety of different places.
Absolutely.
This could come from physical harm, like a lot of what you and I, because we are a family of preppers, and you are married to a man who spent an unusual portion of his adult life learning how to commit acts of violence in defense of others.
When you put it like that,
I mean, that's kind of the gig. But then again, at some point we're going to do an episode about like maybe a split episode about like what it means to be a husband, what it means to be a wife, even though we've kind of done a bunch of that already in the episode about marriage. But like, we will have to have that discussion with the listenership about the fact that, like, call me a chauvinist or toxic male, whatever you want. I firmly believe that as a husband and father, like, your responsibility is to defend those women in the woman and the children in your life up to and including your own death. Like, there is no limit to the violence I'm willing to commit to protect my wife and daughter. There's no limit to the pain I'm willing to experience to protect them. And that is my responsibility as a husband and father. And if I'm not willing to accept that, I am not prepared to take on that responsibility in discussion. Call me toxic male if you want. Don't care.
Well, I was about to say the anti-feminist in me got butterflies when you were saying all that. I was like, ooh. I love your toxic masculinity. I think that we'll go down that rabbit hole. Yeah. But I think that is exactly how that is what a husband's role should be. And I'm telling you, butterflies, I fell in love with you all over again just now.
But anyway, so that malicious influence can be physical violence that you have to protect your child from. It could be social influence. There's a lot of things that children are exposed to these days that, like,
way more than what we were.
Oh yeah. A lot of emphasis on I believe that there's been an effort over quite a while to push the topic of sexuality down to children well below an age that I don't consider to be appropriate.
Yes.
And like, we can debate endlessly about why that has occurred or to what degree that has occurred or who's responsible, but irrelevant in this case. That's responsibility of the parents to guard your children from that until you believe that topic is appropriate to be introduced, and then you introduce it to them in the way you see fit as their parent.
Yeah.
It is not for the world or the schools or social media to push into that child. It is yours as parents. There's a lot of confusion around the topic of gender, which takes on a lot of different facets. I mean, like, Gillian and I are very traditional in this respect. I believe you are born a man or born a woman, and I don't believe that being either gender gives you more worth or more value than the other, but I do wholeheartedly believe that there are certain things one gender will always do better than the other, and there are certain things one gender or the other will only do because we were created that way. We are created to be, in a lot of ways, biological and psychological opposites. Like I did papers on this in college. I've studied this quite a bit because, like, if I'd stayed in college another semester or two, I could have minored in psychology. It was something I found interesting, but like, it's not a happy talking point. But there's lots of evidence to show that men and women react to stress very differently. The average, get 100 women in a room, 90% of them react to stress because with their flight instinct being triggered. Their first reaction is get away from the danger. That's just the way the statistics work out. 90% of men, at the time this was done, men have been feminized so much, I don't know if this still applies, but 90% of men reacted to stress with violence. They reacted by wanting to fight. They charged towards the danger.
Those butterflies are starting to.
Well, but here's the thing. That's a psychological difference. That's a hormonal difference. That's an overabundance of testosterone. That's the reason that our bone density is higher and our muscle mass is higher. Like, that's just the way it works. In reality, it's not rocket science. Yes, Jim. But my point is, like, I don't believe you can change your gender. You can dress differently. You can mutilate your body. You can do whatever you want, but you cannot change your gender. Call me whatever you want. I see it that way. There's nothing a human being on this planet is going to do to change whether or not they have a Y chromosome or a pair of X's.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want to your physical appearance. You can do anything you want to your body. You cannot change your genes, period. I will fight to the death on that point. But if you believe that, you have to make sure that somebody doesn't confuse the holy hell out of your kids by telling them the opposite. And you have to guard against the people who will tell your children, don't tell your mom and dad. That part pisses me off the worst.
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons we pulled our kid out of public school, and we've been advocates of other people pulling their kids out of public school, is because this element has pervaded itself down into the public school system, where people are telling these kids, well, your parents are wrong. They're bigots. They're bad people. So don't tell them what's really going on. I'm here for you. And I've said time and time again, anybody that I've told Piper, anybody that ever tells you don't tell your mom and dad, that person wants to hurt you.
Yeah, I do believe that.
Anybody that tells you don't tell your mom and dad is trying to hurt you, because if they're about to do something or tell you something, even child.
You think even child?
Even child.
Because
if another child tells my child, don't tell your mom and dad, they are trying to conceal something from me that would piss me off. And that's wrong. Because if it involves my child, it involves me and you. And we should be involved in that conversation.
Let's go there for just a second, because you weren't
Remember those disagreements?
We've told them that obviously we disagree on things. You weren't in the car as we were talking about this, but Piper was playing Truth or Dare at school the other day, and it was, I do have to say that this was at lunch or recess or something, and it was innocent, and it was with her girlfriends in her classroom, so it was just the girls in the class. And I was not shocked in any way, because I know my daughter, but someone at the table had said, well, you can't tell anyone. And it was things like, who did they have a crush on, and some other things like, had they started their period, and things like that. And someone had said, well, you can't tell anyone. And Piper said, well, then I can't play because I'm going to tell my mom and dad. And they said, well, why would you tell your mom and dad this? And she said, because I don't keep secrets from my mom and dad. And it's not that, I mean, Piper does, at this age, Piper does come home and tell us pretty much everything. And she will go on for hours about conversations that she's had with her friends at school, and what happened on the playground, and what was said here, and what happened in class, and what did her teachers say. And we really do get a very thorough review of the day from our daughter.
I get a debriefing.
Yes, it is a debriefing. Like, report in, ma'am. It is now 3:30. I need a report of your day, but it's not like that. But she was very clear with her friends. I don't keep secrets from my mom and dad. And in this way, it was very innocent. It was I think it was more for my case, because I'm a teacher at that school. I don't want Mr. Abelay to know who I have a crush on in my class. And I don't want maybe Miss Rabelais to know that I've started my period or anything like that, which is as 10-year-old girls, 11-year-old girls, I totally understand that. But I was not shocked when my daughter told her girlfriends, I am going to tell my mom and dad because I don't keep secrets from my mom and dad. So in that case, do you still believe that it was um, someone trying to hurt Piper by
I
saying, don't tell your mom and dad?
I will allow a narrow exemption for that.
Okay.
But I still think that you should ultimately like teach your children exactly like we taught Piper. We don't keep secrets in this family. We are open with each other. We keep each other in the loop because it goes back to that whole conversation about like the world giving out consequences versus me and you. No one cares about her like you and I do.
Right.
So regardless of what's going on that she's being told to conceal from the two of us, no one will have her best interest at heart more than you and I.
Agreed.
And that there's just no way around that. But all this being the case, I don't think it's possible. And even if it was possible, I don't think it's socially responsible. I see you over there, silly. I don't think it's socially responsible to try to completely isolate your child from the world around them so that you can make sure these influences never come to them. I don't think that's possible. And I don't think it's socially responsible, even if you could. Like the kid's going to have friends, they're going to have other relationships in the community. And sooner or later, they're going to get exposed to something you really wish they hadn't been.
Yeah. She was exposed to something at school by another girl in an upper grade from her that revolved around periods and conception and things like that. And she's in the living room now listening in to our conversation, so I have to kind of be coded. But I was very quick to tell her that whatever is said on the playground with her group of girlfriends, please come back and ask me, because they may not be telling you the right thing. And I want to tell you what's right and what really happens. And, in different scenarios, especially in these pre and pubescent years of her life, it should come from mom because she is a girl. And and what we've also told her is it should come from dad because he's lived with a girl for 18 years. And so he's not naive to things and can tell her things. But and not that she can't talk to her girlfriends about things like this, because I do think it's healthy for a girl and a woman to have a set of women or girls in their circle to discuss these types of things. But at her age, at 11 years old, in her prepubescent years, those conversations should happen with a parent, not a teacher, not whatever. It should come from the parent. And that is something that you and I have discussed and agreed with wholeheartedly. And she understands. I can have those conversations with my mom and dad, but I really do need to go back and ask, is this right? Is what she said really okay? And then I can pull back and say, you're not ready for that conversation. If that conversation comes up, I would like for you to walk away from that conversation because you're not ready to hear those things. And when you are ready to hear those things, I will tell you about those things.
Or we can make the decision that, like, because one thing is like there's a lot of things I think we exposed Piper to younger than most parents would, but we did it in what we felt was an age appropriate way.
Mm-hmm.
Like we took a piece of this subject off that she was ready for.
Yeah.
And we said, here's the piece of this subject. There's a lot more, but we'll get to that later. So I would suggest that if somebody has accidentally or on purpose short-circuited that, now's the time to make sure that the piece they already have, because they got it without you being part of the equation, is what you believe the right piece is. Because like you said, I mean, I'm notorious for telling Piper, I'm like, you will be told things by all kinds of people in your life. And most of the time you're only hearing half the story.
Mm-hmm.
And the other half is important so that she has context. She can make up her own mind. She can make her decisions. She can defend her ideas. Like, I don't want my child to be a parrot that
right.
only regurgitates what she's heard her dad say at home. I want her to understand the argument and see both sides and be able to say, this is the decision I've come to that I agree with, and this is why, and this is how I got there.
Yeah. For instance, she's doing, I think she might be finished, but there was a project at school where they had to, I'm going to say this wrong. They had to do a paper where they picked a topic and they had to defend that topic. And her teacher, before I knew this was happening, her teacher came to me in the courtyard and said, I'm just letting you know that we're doing these persuasive arguments or persuasive essays right now, that, and your daughter has picked Second Amendment rights. And I don't know at the time if she was expecting me to be like, what? Like Piper's doing something about guns? But I was like, great. Her dad is going to be so excited to hear that she's writing a persuasive essay on gun rights. And she just yelled from the living room, I got an A. But she was able to, at 11 years, almost 11 years old, dive into it. She had to do the research on her own. She had to defend whatever her initial topic was on, and she had to review it from both sides and come up with an end result. And she did that at 10. So she knows. And I pat you on the back. I also pat her ELA teacher on the back too for not shying away from letting her do such a very a topic that is very much
hotly contested.
Whereas, Piper had said that in public school, she wouldn't have been allowed to do an essay on Second Amendment rights. But I am overjoyed that time out before she comes over here. I'm overjoyed that her ELA teacher allowed her to do those things. So it's, do you want to say something?
I'd like to.
Oh my goodness, here she comes.
Okay, now this is twice you've been on Raising Values and you have not been on Matter of Facts yet.
Okay, well, say what you want to say because you have an audience.
I wasn't even allowed to talk about firearms and guns or anything that had to do with hurting other people at public school. I wasn't even allowed to write an essay about that.
Yeah. And but fortunately you have a teacher and you're out of school now where, I mean, that's not the focal point, but these students are allowed to get into the hard details of what it means to grow up in the country that we do now, because the country that your father and I were raised in is totally different than what it is for you. And that brings me to the hard topic of, gun violence and school shootings. And, we had someone from the podcast listenership that reached out to me recently and asked my opinion on how to discuss those hard things with their son. And, the first thing that I said to him was, it has to be age appropriate. And you have to know where they're getting their information. Mm-hmm. For Piper, we don't watch I have not watched the news in this house since Phil was in Iraq, because at that time I did not want to see information at the base that he was on, and video of his base exploding or things like that. I did not want to find out on the news that my boyfriend was killed in Iraq. So I stopped watching the news. And I never picked the news back up. And usually the only time we watch the news is for severe weather. And that's on our phones or whatever. But we don't have cable. And so we don't watch the news in this house. And therefore, my child is not going to be exposed to flashy news stories that's going to get ratings. The only way she's going to hear that is either from us or some source at school.
I think it's important to point out that, whereas the media at one time, I believe, was more focused on presenting facts and allowing the audience to make up their own mind, they have absolutely turned into an ad service for money.
Yes.
So what's happening is that if this thing gets more clicks or more views, that's what they're going to show. And in this case, showing horrible things seems to work. So that's what they gravitate towards. If videos of people hugging puppies sold more ads. That'd be all you'd see on the news. And that's one of the reasons why, like, we have punted news media, traditional news media, out of this household. I indulge in a bit of it, so I'm abreast of issues that we deal with the Matter of Facts podcast.
You do. You watch more than I do.
But even then, like, it's not something that's just sitting. I don't have Fox or CNN or NBC sitting on the TV all the time where it's constantly bombarding me. I have to make a conscious effort to say, I need to check in and see what's going on in the world. I go check in and then I pull back out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a much healthier consumption habit for what can be, I mean, I would almost call it a psyop if we were using military terms. But I think I think Gillian's dead on. I mean, yes, it has to be age appropriate. I think it's also important to couch it in a lot of the same language I've used to talk about prepping with Piper. Because, like, when Piper was very little, I started teaching her how to be aware of her surroundings. Don't be walking around with a cell phone in your hands and all this silly stuff. Keep your head up. Keep looking around. Watch people's hands. Watch if people suddenly change direction towards you. Like they were walking this way and then suddenly they're pointed right at you.
Mm-hmm.
And as you continue to walk, their aim continues to change, like to intercept you. I've taught her all these things, and I've always emphasized the likelihood of someone actually trying to hurt you is fairly minimal. But the reason why we talk about these things, like we were at Walmart the other day and we were sitting in line because poor cashier had her hands full. Well, we were sitting in line and I took a minute. I'm like, hey, war game time. Where are the exits? Where are your two nearest exits? And one was where we came in at. And she looked around until she saw the other one. And I'm like, okay, what is the most likely vector or direction danger would come from right now? And she thought initially it'd be from the back of the store. And I'm like, but what way did you come in from? From there, right? So if someone comes in here trying to harm people, they're more likely to come from that direction and push everybody towards the back of the store. That's why it's important to know where all of your exits are. So, if they come from there, you go that direction. Or if they come from that direction, you go that direction. Or if they come in from both directions, there's exits at the back of the store through the stock room. But I always tell her, I'm like, the likelihood that you will ever have to use any of this knowledge I'm imparting upon you is minimal. You may never, ever witness or feel violence in your life. But the reason we talk about these things is because they're what we call in the prepping world low likelihood, high consequence.
Mm-hmm.
Likelihood, very, very minimal. Consequence, through the roof. And that is a lot of what, like from the prepping world, that's a lot of what prepping is. The likelihood that my family home would get whacked by a Cat 3 hurricane, get 3 trees dropped on the roof, and us be without power for 8 days was pretty minimal, but apparently it wasn't zero. So we had preps to deal with those kinds of problems. And now we have even more preps to deal with that if it ever happens again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would encourage, specific to the topic of like violence at schools. That's what I would encourage a person to point out is like, there's like something like 50,000 private schools in the US right now. I can look it up if y'all are really curious, or you could Google it. I mean, the information's out there. But, when you look at the rate at which these violent incidents are happening compared to the number of private schools this year that didn't see a single one, it is a very, very small likelihood, but it's not zero. And that's why I think it's appropriate to point out to your child that this will probably never happen. But just in case it does, this is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that discussion should take place in tandem with whatever the school is teaching, because hopefully the school has a shelter-in-place plan. Hopefully they have some kind of a risk mitigation strategy in place. If they don't, I would encourage you to call that school and start pushing on them, telling them, get your butt in gear. I mean, not that I think your school ever would, but I have told you in the past, I would happily spend an afternoon at that school out of my own time, my own pocket, hardening all those doors. I would happily go up there and help and check them for physical penetration. I would happily spend my own time and money making sure that school is as safe as humanly possible. All they have to do is call me and ask, and then just be open to what I have to say. Because I want not just my own child, my own wife, but I want these schools to be safe places. And I think that means acknowledging that the risk is minimal, yet at the same time acknowledging that the consequences are very severe, so we should plan ahead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to talk about these very hard and scary issues with our kids, keeping it age appropriate. And you had said something earlier. You have to take that topic and
Piece it out.
give it to them how they can accept it, and there are going to be details that you have to leave out, especially for different age groups, and you're going to have to gauge that with your own child. But it's also important to know where their information is coming from, who are they getting it from, what are they talking about, and then have those conversations and ask a lot of questions of your child, and listen to the answers they're giving you, because a lot of times it's going to come from what they've heard and pieced together in their head, and so you're going to get their opinion of it. But you have to learn to listen to where those opinions might have come from. Did you say that and now they're repeating it? Did they hear it on the news and now they're repeating it? Where is it coming from? That way you can gauge what you can say and what you need to help quell that fear, to help me with this, Phil. Help me with my words. I can't get my words
Kind
together.
of help to make sure that they have an appropriate understanding of the topic. And when I say an appropriate understanding, I mean they have to understand from your perspective what is the pertinent information for them to derive their own opinion of this. And I feel like that has to also be very strictly rooted with an understanding of like consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the likelihood of these consequences? Was the severity? And that's not just with regards to violence, but it's also like a lot of these other things we were talking about, like intimacy and everything else. Like this is, you have to understand that these are the consequences if you commit this action. This is the likelihood that you can commit this action and get away without these consequences. So you roll the dice enough times, you're going to come up snake eyes sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like this is all really just as an extension of like what we were saying about parenting as a whole, raising children as a whole. Like they start life as this empty vessel, and it is our job to instruct them in the way we believe will best prepare them for life without us eventually. Which, like, you and I were talking the other day about how like this is the bittersweet part of parenting, is knowing that one day they're gonna be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And like the first time they're gone, they're coming back probably because they're going out on a date or going out with their friends, and we're going to sit here in this house with just the two of us and maybe the cat, and be like, it is way too quiet in this house without this hilarious little girl giggling and chirping and, hey mom, come check this out, hey dad, come check this out. And it's going to be way, way, way too quiet. And then she'll come back and that'll pass. But eventually, like, she's probably going to go off and do her own thing, be her own person. And that is, it's a bittersweet part of parenting. Gillian has intoned several times, like, that's going to be the hard part for her. And I don't know that I would use the phrase it's hard. It's the part of parenting I'm not really looking forward to. But at the same time, I kind of am.
Yeah, I know. I get that. I'm not saying that I don't look forward to the time when it's just you and I and we can figure out dating and.
But that's not even where I'm going.
Oh, well, where are you going?
Well, I look forward to the day when she's out on her own, because that is when I get to watch the next phase of who she is. Like, at this point, I know her as my daughter. I know her as, the child growing up in our home. I know her as the best of both of us, because she's brilliant and she has all of our strengths and very few of our weaknesses. Same thing I said before. I feel like we've done a very admirable job of teaching her how to succeed in the world one day. And when she eventually reaches the point where she spreads her wings, I get to see the next phase of who she's going to become without having the constant daily influence of you and I here, where she has to figure some of these things out more for herself. She has to learn to be more reliant on herself and on other relationships in her life that are not mom and dad. It's like I used to say about her entire the whole point of the whole period of her growing up from very small child into like where she is now. The cool part about parenting is you get to have every one of those experiences with them. Their first step, their first friend, their first, the first time that you play peekaboo with them and their eyes pop open and they start giggling their head off. Like you get to do every one of those first with that child. And you get to watch their entire life. And her eventually one day leaving us is going to be just the next phase of that. I'll have to watch it from afar.
That makes me sad.
Yeah, me too. But it's not. But that's why I say I'm like I have mixed feelings about it. Because on the one hand, yes, it's sad she's not going to be here every day. But on the other hand, it is still another first for her.
Are we both going to start crying?
I'm tearing up a little bit.
I don't want to think about. I mean, I look forward to that day for her. I don't look forward to that day for me, because I mean, I can already feel the pain
The welling up.
of empty nest syndrome happening, and she's only 10. But I know eventually that day is going to come, and I hope that we have done what we should have done, to provide a very, very firm foundation of her becoming an adult during our parenting years. And I hope that we've ingrained in her enough and provided such a stable foundation for her that she can fall back on the things that we've taught her when she's no longer in our house anymore, or maybe she's become a mother, or maybe we are just grandparents to corgis, and that's fine too. Those things don't matter to us. Just like her going to college or not going to college doesn't matter to us. I want to know that we have done everything that we can as parents to ensure that our daughter is well prepared to be an adult. And at that point, we will have succeeded once we see that we have done everything we can. And I know parenting doesn't stop when she moves out.
Nope.
Hell, I was in my 30s still crawling into bed with my mother just to be hugged and snuggled and loved. And I hope that my daughter comes home in her 30s or 40s even and crawls into my bed to snuggle at night. Now, see, I'm going to start crying. This is the third episode of Raising Values and the third episode that I have cried on.
You said it was going to be therapy.
It is a therapy session for me, and I love this. I guess, yes, in a way I am excited to see where she takes her life. I can already feel the pain of her not being here. That Mother Earth thing finally set in, and that connection was made. So anyway, so before we start boohoo belly aching in front of everybody.
So I guess to wrap up, parenting or raising children is being their protector, being their guardian, being their teacher. And if you the thing that I got told a long, long time ago is that, again, I got told this from a male perspective, father to son. But a father's job is to prepare him for the day he won't be there anymore, which can be any variety of things. But that is my job as her father, is to prepare her for the day that I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be here to clean the scraped knees. I'm not going to be here to wipe away the tears when she has a bad day. I'm not going to be here to help her make hard decisions. So I have to make sure that I do all my work so that on that day that I'm not here, she can handle it.
Yeah.
And your job as a mother is very much the same, and it's not just like teaching her how to do her taxes and balance checkbook, but it's like teaching her how to emotionally cope with life.
Yeah.
So that is what I would say parenting is. Yes, you're their guardian, you're their provider. You're also their first and their last teacher. And I think if you approach parenting from that perspective of, I love and treasure this child as a gift to me and as an ultimate responsibility. And my job is to teach them and prepare them to enter the world successfully. I think if you approach from that perspective, a lot of the smaller questions become smaller questions. as long as you have like a good firm, as long as they are raised by two people that are firmly committed to each other and two people who have a firm understanding of what parenting is. I think a lot of the little questions about how do I do this, or how much do I discipline, or how much do I nurture, all of those problems tend to sort themselves out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So sign this one out.
I think so. Yeah. So questions, comments, whatever, send them to us. Of course, we've always said this on the Matter of Facts podcast, but we're always open for messages or anything. So there are ways to reach us. If you would like to extend this conversation further, of course, we would love to talk to you. So there we go. So thank you for watching and or listening to this episode, and we will see you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.